I begin this webinar by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we meet. I also acknowledge our gratitude that we share these lands today, our sorrow for the costs of that sharing, and our hope that we can move in unity to an Australia that is fair and just for all its Indigenous peoples. In place of the usual prayer that we open our webinars with, I will read from a small but important section of St. John Paul II's 1981 encyclical Laborum Exercens. It could be turned into a prayer. The passage follows on from a discussion of the need for continued study of the subject of work and of the living conditions of workers. And I quote, "In order to achieve social justice in the various parts of the world, in the various countries, and in the relationships between them, there is a need for ever new movements of solidarity of the workers and with the workers. The solidarity must be present whenever it is called for by the social degrading of the subject of work, by exploitation of the workers, and by the growing areas of poverty and even hunger. The Church is firmly committed to this cause, for she considers it her mission, her service, a proof of her fidelity to Christ, so that she can truly be the Church of the poor. And the poor appear under various forms. They appear in various places and at various times. In many cases, they appear as a result of the violation of the dignity of human work, either because the opportunities for human work are limited as a result of the scourge of unemployment, or because a low value is put on work and the rights that flow from it, especially the right to a just wage and to the personal security of the worker and his or her family." End of quote. Back to you, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Brian. Welcome to everybody on my behalf. And I'd just now like to introduce our guest speaker for today, Tony Annett is a visiting scholar at the Centre for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He has a BA and Masters of Literature from Trinity College in Dublin, in Ireland, his home country, as well as a PhD in economics from Columbia University. Tony spent 2 decades at the International Monetary Fund, including some time as speechwriter for the managing director, or a series of them. And he's also a member of the College of Fellows at the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology. And the reason he's particularly joining us today is as the author of a recent book, Cathonomics, How Catholic Social Tradition Can Create a More Just Economy. So thanks very much for joining us, Tony, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks for inviting me into your home in a very different time zone from where I'm coming from. It is 8:39 p.m. in Washington, D.C., where I'm coming from on a Friday night. So I know it's a very different time where most of you are. So I greet you all. And I want to talk to you this evening or this morning or whenever it is about my book, Cathonomics, which I wrote and published last year. And so the way I want to do this, I want to talk about the 10 principles of Catholic social teaching that I tried to distill from the set of social encyclicals that span from Rerum Novarum in 1891 all the way through to Fratelli Tutti in 2020. And I do think it's possible, even though they are very different documents written by very different popes, to distill a consistent set of principles that really stands the test of time. So once I do that, then I'll talk about what does that mean in terms of practical implications for how we structure the economy today. And then I'll end up talking a little bit about Laudato Si, which I really think is the preeminent encyclical of our times. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, this should work. So here is the PowerPoint that I have. That's my book, Cathonomics. Forward was written by Jeff Sachs. And these are the 10 principles of Catholic social teaching I want to talk about: the common good, integral human development, integral ecology, solidarity, subsidiarity, reciprocity/gratuitousness, the universal destination of goods, the preferential option for the poor, and then rights and duties, and of course, justice. So I've got 10 of them to go through, so I'll be fairly brief with each one, since I don't want to get too bogged down on each one. Otherwise, we will be here all night. So, and I have a quote that goes with each one, a quote from a document of Catholic social teaching. So the first one is the common good, and there we have the famous quote that comes from the Vatican II document Gaudium et Spes, which defines the common good as the sum of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. And fulfillment is the key word there. The common good in the Christian tradition conveys a sense of interfused well-being. You will the well-being of the other person for the other person's sake, on the grounds that, as Aristotle said many centuries ago, that the common good is greater than the good of each individual, just as the body as a whole is greater than each part of the body. Has a very Aristotelian feel. You want to find the institutions that through which each person can reach his or her fulfillment, and that gets points towards the material basis of human flourishing that we all want to have. So that's the common good. The second principle is, there we go. Integral human development is kind of related to it. And this is a quote from Pope Paul VI in his 1967 encyclical Popularum Progressio. And integral human development is the development of each man and the whole man, or as I like to say, each person and the whole person. Let's change the language there, please. So this suggests that development is not about money, it's not about wealth, it's not about GDP, it's the fullest development of each person's personality and potential, so that you become the best version of yourself. It calls for development across all dimensions, not just economics, but social, political, emotional, artistic, cultural, spiritual, and religious. As Pope John Paul II says, it's not about having more, but about being more. And that's a very different notion of development than we economists are used to thinking of. So that's principle number 2, integral human development. Principle number 3 is another integral, and that's integral ecology. This is the newest principle, which comes from Laudato Si in 2015. And I have a quote from Pope Francis there, which I'll read quickly. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or as a mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. And he goes on to conclude, we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather one complex crisis that is both social and environmental. So this is the idea that the relationships between human beings and the natural world are interconnected, they're deeply intertwined, they're all part of a larger whole. That gives rise to a moral injunction to care for and protect creation, because when we upset the natural balance, we also upset the social balance. If we degrade the earth, we degrade the potential of people, especially the poor, to be able to flourish. Hence, Pope Francis calls upon us to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. That's integral ecology. Principle number 4 is solidarity. And the quote I have here is from Pope John Paul II's 1987 encyclical Sollicitude Re Socialis. And he defines solidarity as a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is to say, the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all. And that's the key part there. We are all really responsible for all. I describe this in my book as a kind of a super highway to the common good. It's a moral response to the interdependence of human life. And in an increasingly globalized world, there is such a thing as a global common good, which helps us to overcome what Pope Francis calls the globalization of indifference. That's principle number 4, solidarity. Principle number 5 is subsidiarity, and the quote I have here is from Pope Pius XI's Quadragesimo Anno from 1931. And this basically says that decisions should be taken at the lowest level possible and the highest level necessary. So lowest level possible, highest level necessary. What it means is that higher level communities should help lower level communities, but not usurp their rightful authority. This is not an excuse for libertarianism or small government or free market ideology. Not at all. There's a positive role of the state, to quote Pope Pius, in directing, stimulating, coordinating, supplying, and integrating. The problem is when you have the institutions of civil society that decay, leaving only the individual and the state. You need that rich associational life of families, churches, unions, cooperatives, and voluntary associations. That is subsidiarity. Principle number 5 is reciprocity and gratuitousness. And Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti in 2020 defines gratuitousness as the ability to do some things simply because they are good in themselves without concern for personal gain or recompense. This is a human level principle. We care about the well-being of the person on the other side of the economic encounter. So against Adam Smith, we don't engage out of self-interest, but to make a gift of something to the other person, to give gratuitously so that this seed will grow. It's a way of embedding fraternity in the marketplace, and it builds a deeper relationship, increasing the chances that the extended benefit will eventually be returned. And this is key to the Italian civil economy paradigm, which is an Italian school of economics that arose in contrast to the dominant Anglo-American school, which is more influenced by Adam Smith. That's reciprocity and gratuitousness. Principle 7 is the universal destination of goods. And I'm coming back here to Gaudium et Spes, which defines the universal destination as the idea that man should regard the external things that he legitimately possesses, not only as his own, but also as common, in the sense that they should be able to benefit not only him, but also others. This is the idea that the goods of the earth are destined for all people, without exclusion, without exception. It says that private property is legitimate, but it is not an absolute or an unconditional right, as, say, libertarians would hold. It, as Pope John Paul II says, it always comes with a social mortgage, or as Pope Francis says, it's a secondary natural right. Not a primary natural right, a secondary natural right. That's the universal destination of goods. Principle number 8 is the preferential option for the poor, which is a very related principle to the universal destination of goods. And I'm coming back to Pope John Paul II's 1987 encyclical here, when he defines it, he says, this is an option or a special form of primacy in the exercise of Christian charity, to which the whole tradition of the church bears witness. It affects the life of each Christian inasmuch as he or she seeks to imitate the life of Christ, but it also applies equally to our social responsibilities and hence to our manner of living and to the logical decisions to be made concerning the ownership and use of goods. This is the idea that God chose to be identified with the poor, in whose faces we are called upon to see Christ. All human action, all economic policy should be judged first and foremost in terms of how it affects the poor. That's the preferential option for the poor. And it's kind of the opposite to the way we normally assess policy, isn't it? Now I want to come on to principle number 9, which is rights and duties. The quote I have here is from Pope Pacem in Terris by Pope John the 23rd, which, as somebody mentioned, is 60 years old this year. And this is a wonderful quote here about how Catholics approach human rights. Any well-regulated and productive association of men in society demands the acceptance of one fundamental principle, that each individual man is truly a person. His is a nature that is endowed with intelligence and free will. As such, he has rights and duties, which together flow as a direct consequence from his nature. These rights and duties are universal and inviolable, and therefore altogether inalienable. You can see echoes here of Jacques Maritain. You can see echoes of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But very basically, in the Catholic tradition, human rights flow from human dignity. Now, the interesting thing for Catholic social teaching is, what are the first rights listed? The first rights listed are not civil rights. They are not political rights. They are rather economic rights. Pope John says, man has the right to bodily integrity and to the means necessary for the proper development of life: food, clothing, shelter, medical care, rest, the necessary social services. In consequence, he has the right to be looked after in the event of ill health, disability stemming from his work, widowhood, old age, enforced unemployment, or whenever through no fault of his own he is deprived of the means of his livelihood. So, key thing here is human rights are recognized, but the first rights are economic rights, and rights are always twinned with duties. With every right, there's always a corresponding duty. That's principle number 9, Catholic notions of rights and duties. Catholic principle number 10 is Catholic notions of justice. Justice is giving others what is their due, what is owed to them. And for Thomas Aquinas, it's a cardinal virtue. There are 3 forms of justice recognized by Catholic social teaching. One is commutative justice. That's the justice between 2 individuals, the justice of contracts, agreements, and promises. And pretty much everybody accepts this, even libertarians. Distributive justice, on the other hand, is what the community owes the individual, how the fruits of the earth and economic activity are to be properly apportioned. Libertarians do not recognize distributive justice at all. Nor do they recognize contributive justice, which is what the individual owes the community. Think of voting, participation in civic life, paying your taxes, leaving the environment in good shape. That is how Catholic social teaching views justice. Now, all of these principles tied together give a fairly coherent view of what economic life, what Cathonomics would look like. So let me talk a little bit about that. I want to start off by talking about the twin rocks of shipwreck. The twin rocks of shipwreck were listed by Pope Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno, which were defined as individualism and collectivism. These are both rocks of shipwreck that you want to avoid. Individualism says we only have the private right to private property, but we don't have any social aspect of property. Whereas communist collectivism says the exact opposite. There's no private ownership of property. It's all owned collectively, but there's no private. It's 100% social. Whereas Catholic social teaching says you want a balance. You want both a private ownership, but you also want some element of social ownership of property. And I have argued in Cathonomics that the economic or political system that best encapsulates this is a form of Christian democracy or social democracy. Catholic social teaching also says that you need a directing spirit. It condemns the errors of what it calls individualist economic thinking, that it says that we can't have economic life being directed by free competition based on the principle of self-direction, because if you do that, you get what it says, the evil individualistic spirit. Therefore, it is necessary that economic life be subject to and governed once again by a true and effective directing principle. So there is no case in Catholic social teaching for free market ideology, for libertarianism, for neoliberalism, as it were, that you always need the public authorities to step in and to make sure that that the common good is being served. We also see this very clearly in Pope Paul VI, Popularum Progressio from 1967. He was basically saying, we are looking at certain concepts. This was basically when free market ideology was beginning to emerge again after being submerged for many decades by social democracy. So Pope Paul says these concepts present profit as the chief spur to economic progress, free competition as the guiding norm of economics, and private ownership of the means of production as an absolute right, having no limits nor concomitant social obligations. This unbridled liberalism paves the way for a particular kind of tyranny, rightly condemned by our predecessor Pius XI, for it results in the international imperialism of money. So pretty strong language right there. By the way, Pope John Paul II is also, as well as condemning neoliberalism, he's also condemning communism. And this is from his 1991 encyclical Centesimus Annus. And I'm not going to read this whole quote because it's way too long, but I can share the slides after this presentation if you want. But there's a couple of highlighted phrases I will pick out. You know, this is a system where the good of the individual is completely subordinated to the functioning of the socio-economic mechanism without reference to free choice. Man is reduced to a series of social relationships. There's an opposition to private authority, which is hard to respect the dignity of the human person. So the condemnation of communism rejects the notion of class warfare. It rejects the suppression of individual freedom and dignity, as well as private ownership and initiative. And it rejects the reduction of the human being to the material dimension alone, to being a mere cog in the socio-economic machine. So we see very clearly in Catholic social teaching that these twin rocks of shipwrecks are both being condemned very, very strongly. On one hand, communist collectivism, and on the other hand, free market libertarianism. And strikingly enough, you'll often see the same kind of language being deployed against both rocks of shipwreck. Here is, by the way, Pope Francis condemning neoliberalism in Fratelli Tutti. I'll quote this: the marketplace by itself cannot resolve every problem, however much we are asked to believe this dogma of neoliberal faith. Whatever the challenge, this impoverished and repetitive school of thought always offers the same recipes. Neoliberalism simply reproduces itself by resorting to magic theories of spillover or trickle as the only solution to societal problems. There is little appreciation of the fact that the alleged spillover does not resolve the inequality that gives rise to new forms of violence threatening the fabric of society. Well, some people will criticize Pope Francis for this kind of language. They will say, oh, he's just an Argentinian pope. He doesn't understand the free market economy, which I think is completely wrong, because, by the way, here's John Paul II using the exact same language 20 years earlier in a document called Ecclesia in America in 1999. He says, more and more in many countries of America, a system known as neoliberalism prevails, based on a purely economic conception of man. the system considers profit and the law of the market as its only parameters, to the detriment of the dignity of and respect due to individuals and peoples. If you're being attentive to what he's saying here, you'll see he's using language which is almost identical to the language he uses to condemn communism. The same idea. It deprives people of human dignity. It reduces them to being a cog in the economic machine. It denies the true transcendent nature of the human being, as it were, by reducing them to something very tawdry. So there's an anthropological error, both libertarianism and communist collectivism. And finally here's Pope Francis from 2017, explicitly condemning libertarianism, because he said libertarianism denies the idea of a common good. It denies both common and good, because the idea of common implies constriction of some individuals, and the idea of good deprives freedom of its essence. So that basically is Pope Francis using very strong language to criticize neoliberalism. So let me try and sum up what I was trying to say in this section, which is that we have the twin rocks of shipwreck that we want to avoid at all costs. We don't want free market ideology. We don't want libertarianism, but we don't want communism or collectivism either. So what do we want? Well, I would argue that we want a system of Christian or social democracy that allows for a market economy, but also allows for economic rights and the social nature of property, which takes the universal destination of goods really seriously, which takes the common good seriously, which takes solidarity seriously, which takes justice seriously. All these principles, which I talked about earlier, I think get affirmed by a system of Christian democracy or social democracy. The kind of economic system we had from around 1945 to 1980, after which it was replaced by neoliberalism. Okay, so that is part 2 of my talk. I now want to move straight into part 3, which is on Laudato Si. And the reason I'm doing this is because I think this is a singularly important encyclical with great wisdom and great insights for the challenges of our time. Pope Francis, in Laudato Si, he wrote this encyclical as a response to what he saw as the mistreatment of our common home, which he identifies with our mother and our sister, using the language of St. Francis of Assisi. For him, the biblical injunction for humanity to have dominion over creation has been misinterpreted, giving rise to a warrant to mistreat nature as we see fit. Pope Francis calls this a disordered anthropocentrism, whereby the original harmony between creator, humanity, and creation has been ruptured, and this rupture is brought about by human arrogance, greed, hubris, selfishness, and indeed sin. He says, here's the key part of intergenerational solidarity. Each community can take from the bounty of the earth whatever it needs for subsistence, but it also has the duty to protect the earth and to ensure its fruitfulness for coming generations. The earth is both a legacy from our parents and a loan to our children. That is absolutely key. He goes on to say that all creatures, let me get the quote, creatures do not exist merely to serve humanity. Rather, they have their own value, purpose, and destiny. This calls for an attitude of reverence and respect. And again, I'll quote him here. If we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, the spirituality of St. Francis here, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. He goes on to talk about the state of our common home. He talks about pollution. He calls the earth a giant pile of filth, very direct language for a papal encyclical. He talks about climate change, affirming the solid scientific consensus that climate change is being caused by human beings burning fossil fuels. He talks about access to safe drinking water, which is a fundamental human right, which is increasingly under threat. He talks about the loss of biodiversity. There he gives us one of his most powerful quotes. Because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. We have no such right. Now, for Pope Francis, he goes on, and this is, of course, you will all appreciate that this is very much a see, judge, act methodology here. And he goes on, so that's the see part. The judge part is he talks about the fault lying with a technocratic paradigm combined with an individualism that puts blind faith in the marketplace. He singles out what he calls the myths of a modernity grounded in a utilitarian mindset, by which he means individualism, unlimited progress, competition, consumerism, and the unregulated market. The technocratic paradigm centers on the idea that all economic interventions should be judged solely in terms of utility, efficiency, productivity, to the neglect of dignity and worth of both people and nature. Pope Francis criticizes the tendency of this paradigm to dominate politics and economics in a way that is now globalized. It justifies the emphasis on constant economic growth that does not respect the planetary boundaries. This is an inherently confrontational vision based on an ethos of possession, mastery, and transformation. The technocratic paradigm looks upon nature as an external object to be manipulated and controlled, rather than as a common home that supports our mutual flourishing. It's a form of modern anthropocentrism predicated on a Promethean vision of mastery, whereby human beings misunderstand their relationship to the natural order. This mentality causes Francis to insist that, and I quote, our immense technological development has not been accompanied by the development in human responsibility, values, and conscience. This gives rise for Pope Francis to a practical relativism, which he defines as a relativism which sees everything as irrelevant unless it serves one's own immediate interests. So it gives absolute priority to immediate convenience and instant gratification, leading people to exploit nature and their fellow human beings in the service of self-interest. This, by the way, is the ultimate root of the twin social and environmental crises. Now, this gives rise to Pope Francis's signature diagnosis of the throwaway culture, whereby people and things are used to satisfy immediate convenience and then cast away when they serve no further use. This not only leads to the destruction of nature, but to a profound economy of exclusion. And I quote him here, where those excluded are no longer society's underside or its fringes or its disenfranchised. They are no longer even a part of it. The excluded are not the exploited, but the outcasts, the leftovers. So if we've done see and judge, what about act? Well, Laudato Si talks a lot about solutions, both individual and collective. He fundamentally, Pope Francis calls for a new type of progress, one that is healthier, more human, more social, and more integral. What he's really calling for is integral and sustainable development, which he defines as an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. Now, this fundamentally starts with the individual, and he calls for an ecological conversion or ecological citizenship. And he talks about what I call moral multiplier effects, that small actions on the part of each individual can, even though they are small, they can spread good throughout society. That's how virtue works. But he also cautions that self-interest on the part of individuals will not by itself remedy the extremely complex situation facing our world today. This is why we also need communal conversion in the domain of politics and economics. This starts with the global level. He says that interdependence obliges us to think of one world with a common plan. So we need to solve the combined ecological and social and economic problems at the global level, at the national level, and at the local level. And of course, Laudato Si was written at a very important juncture for global governance. In September 2015, Pope Francis addressed the gathering of world leaders at the United Nations when they were about to adopt the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which really encapsulate this idea of sustainable development, which is so endorsed by Laudato Si. 3 months later, Pope Francis endorsed the Paris Agreement on climate change, whereby the nations of the world got together once again and agreed that they would finally take action to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to the best extent possible, which means moving to net zero carbon emissions by mid-century. And that's going to take a Herculean effort at the level of economics and politics. Business also has the role to play. Laudato Si talks about business. It has a negative injunction not to destroy the environment or to contribute to climate change more than the Paris Agreement would suggest, but also a positive injunction to support sustainable development solutions. Pope Francis actually says that business is a noble vocation, but it's only a noble vocation if it supports the common good and it respects the limits of the environment. And finally, he also says that civil society has a role to play, that civil society is well capable of drawing public attention and deploying pressure or even using consumer boycotts against goods that from companies that are destroying the environment. So that's my bird's eye view of Laudato Si, and that is the third part of my Cathonomics talk, what I wanted to talk to you about this evening. And with that, I will stop the share and turn it back over to you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Tony, for that wonderfully clear presentation, which reminds me very much of your book, in fact, no doubt, because it's based on your book. I received it in the mail, actually, from the publisher the other day, or from, well, wherever I bought it. And yes, it's extremely clear, and thanks very much for that. And I do recommend your book to everybody listening and watching tonight. I've put the link in the chat there. And I don't know if people have had time to kind of think or ask any questions, but anyway, now it's our communal time. So if you do have any comments or questions that you'd like to share, feel free. If I might not be able to see you on the screen, so just either feel free to speak up or use the little hand raising icon. I see in the chat we've already got a couple of comments. Nora from South Africa. We've got a few continents represented here. So we've got Africa as well as North America. Nora, would you like to speak to your comment there?
Yes, greetings from Durban, and what an interesting book. I'm most fascinated and interested to see the parallels between the criticism of the communist regime and capitalism. And suddenly a light went on in my head that basically it's communism is state capitalism, because it's the same kind of control, it's the same kind of repression of individual and communal moral and ethical values in the favor of profit at the expense of human dignity, at the expense of human life. And it also discourages free and critical thinking, as we've seen, and a big danger, of course, and advantage at the same time is internet and media and how that's being controlled through algorithms. I mean, we have the wonderful freedom of using the internet to meet tonight, but at the same time, I mean, our data is perhaps like a new oil that's being used by these multinationals that are almost like machines in their own right now. They're machines because they don't have human feelings, they don't have human values. They're like massive giants striding the world. In the book of Revelation, it was dragons. Well, maybe here we can, in our new era, we can talk about machines controlling human minds and controlling human thoughts. And freedom of thought for me, and freedom to practice religion as well, and one's spirituality, is being repressed at all different levels in society. And the church is hopefully going to be one of the new bulwarks in civil society, a new prophetic voice that's already become a new prophetic voice. But to support other prophetic voices, we have to network. We have to network with the youth who have, we can see with Greta Thunberg when she calls out, our house is burning, that we have to form those alliances at local level and wear multiple hats, not just the Christian hat anymore. No, the Christian hat is there, of course, but we have to be able to move into civil society structures and movements and so on. As Christians, wearing the Christian hat, but also wearing the Greenpeace hat or the Extinction Rebellion hat or whatever. And it's amazing when one starts looking at our modern martyrs who are being neglected, or discarded by the powers that be. Here in South Africa, we've had local community leaders assassinated when they've fought for their environmental rights. And in the new South Africa, in this time of post-apartheid, the voice of the church is not out there. It's not really being heard as a voice. It's there, but it's, again, whether it's the control over media that through these big multinationals and through corrupt interests or whatever. So even at parish level, to get that voice out there, what is actually happening, how are people actually being affected, is terribly important. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks very much, Nora. Would you like to respond to that, Tony?
Oh, no, just that I thank Nora for her comments and I agree with it. I think that there is a remarkable overlap between how the church talks about liberalism, neoliberalism, libertarianism on one hand, and kind of communism on the other hand. It is the same kind of anthropological error. It both reflects a false view of the human person, which goes against their dignity. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Thanks, Tony. I saw Bruce. Did you want to say something, Bruce? Duncan?
Yes, thank you, Stefan, and welcome everybody. Anthony, I really enjoyed reading your book. I think it's a splendid contribution. And it's a book we really need at the moment because there's nothing quite like it around, able to talk about the Catholic social tradition in in a way that people versed in economics can understand. And I think you bring to the unique thing you bring to this is not just the philosophy so much, but the expertise of being able to marry that up with your own economic involvement and to relate the two. So I think there's a lot there. But the question I'd like to ask you is, Pope Francis has been mentioning and supporting just recently, or in the last few years, Mariana Mazzucato in her thinking on what to do about the international economy. How do we rebuild it along those principles? And I was wondering if you'd like to comment on this.
Yeah, yes, he appointed Mariana Mazzucato to the Pontifical Academy of Life, and she is a top-class economist, and she's made a number of contributions, but I think her main contribution is to say that a lot of value is not just created by the private sector, but it's created jointly between the state and the private sector. That's how value was historically created in most economies of the world. And we kind of lost that wisdom in the neoliberal era, and we need to get back to that idea. Classic example would be COVID vaccines, which the mRNA technology was developed by public funding, where the vaccines themselves were developed by private companies, but that could never have happened without the public funding to start off with. And the internet was created by public funding too. There's plenty of examples of where industrial policy by the state actually led to major productivity improvements going forward. And Mazzucato really brings that out. And I think, you know, Pope Francis really appreciates her contribution to economics. Yeah.
I think it's Fran Smolin who's got a comment in the chat. Fran, would you like to speak to that? It's also following up on Mariana Mazzucato.
I don't fully understand economics, so I feel like I'm sort of speaking out of my depths, but I have been drawn to come to know about Mariana through our own treasurer here in Australia, Jim Chalmers, and then actually looked at some of the work that's happening in Wales, where they have worked really strongly, it seems like, to bring about a well-being economics that, you know, that considers the common good, I suppose. So I'm really just interested in, Tony, how you see Cathonomics actually fits with, you know, this, because even though the changes aren't right across the world, that there seems to be a push right now to something that is beyond neoliberalism. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, this is actually a developing area, the area of well-being economics, or some people call it happiness economics. That the idea is you don't want to just look at GDP or income or wealth. You want to look at what matters for well-being. And if you look every year at the World Happiness Report, you'll see that the countries that come out as the happiest countries in the world are always the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark. And the reason is because, not just because they're rich, the US is a very rich country, but it's way down the list of well-being. The reason is the Scandinavian countries have very high levels of social protection, that people know that they are protected in case something goes wrong with their lives. And they feel a strong sense of social solidarity with each other in society. There's not a competitive environment, there's more of a cooperative environment. So I think these factors all come together to describe what we would mean and what we would want by a wellness economy. And more countries are interested in this now, which I think is a very positive development.
is it a step towards Pope Francis's understanding of the common good?
Yeah, I definitely think it is, because for Pope Francis, he basically says what he supports is the social market economy, which is a market economy that is humanized, including by proper social support and the recognition of economic rights. Yes.
Thanks very much, Fran. I'm not sure if I can see anybody else that's got a question or a comment at the moment, but do speak up if you have.
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Hi, Joe McGurr here from actually from Wagga Wagga in New South Wales in Australia. Thank you very much for your talk, which was really excellent. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I did have a question that related to, I guess, the political environment, and in particular, the parties in the Greens parties that are quite pro-environment in many countries, and certainly in Australia, and an important force. And interestingly, they combine their environmental activism with a strong social activism. In a way, they've picked up on Pope Francis's linking of the issue of poverty with the issue of the environment. However, they seem to take that a step too far in terms of a quite, well, almost a communist sort of control paradigm. Your explanation actually has helped me sort of, I think, pick that apart a little bit today, because that sort of authoritarian approach isn't consistent with what you've described. But I just wonder whether you've observed that elsewhere, probably not in America, I'd say, but perhaps in Europe, and whether you had any comments on that combination of environmental activism, what I would call an almost communist approach to social engineering. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, it's clear, but I don't really have a good answer to that, because I'm not familiar with those types of green parties. I follow a little bit about the Greens in Germany, which seem to be a little bit milder than that. But beyond that, I haven't really been paying much attention to what they're up to. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Others can also feel free to comment on that if they wish. But I do see that Charles Rue has got another a question. Charles, would you like to speak to that? I think, anyway, I see in the chat, Charles has made the point. He's raised the issue about the need for directives for economic functioning, and he's asking you, Tony, to expand on that.
I'm trying to figure out the need the directives for economic functioning of the many democratic strong governments. I mean, government has many roles. There's the welfare role of government. There's the provisioning of economic rights. There's the industrial policy partnerships with private sector. Yeah, so I think, you know, in Catholic social teaching would see a strong role for government in all of these areas, but there's always a but. You want to make sure that subsidiarity is respected, that you want to do things if you can do things at a low level, then you want to do things at a low level too. Yeah.
Do you want to say any more about that, Charles? Can't see you on the screen right now. Anyway, free to speak up if you do. I see Nora has chimed in.
No, it's just an issue that seems to have come up quite a few times even in European countries, Hungary, Poland, and whatnot, about ordinary citizens leaning towards supporting more authoritarian governments. And I just wonder if this is something that's almost a global trend, you know?
Yeah, I think it is. And, you know, Pope Francis wrote a lot about this in Fratelli Tutti. So that definitely is worth reading, where he condemns kind of false populists, nationalists, authoritarians, xenophobes. He notices there are indeed worrying trends, not only in Europe, but across the world. And these are not really, these types of government are not aligned with Catholic teaching, unfortunately. And he's very clear about that. Yeah.
Nora, you had another comment there.
Yes, so thinking further about the machine and how the machine is almost like a person in its own right made me realize that, remember rather, that the word corporate comes from the word body, and that corporates have been given rights over the individual rights that are upheld in Laudato Si'. And why? Why was it that they were given rights over human beings, and as if they themselves were human beings? And I think that goes back maybe to the 1950s or the 1940s, where these laws started being passed in action. So it is very important to look at policy in relation to the laws in countries that protect these corporates from getting away with just leaving environmental destruction and degradation behind themselves, because they dissolve themselves as a corporate. They become insolvent, or they amalgamate with another corporate, and so it's like it's a machine that is morphing and growing into bigger and bigger and bigger monsters that are actually eating up our world and leaving behind the acid mine drainage and what have you. Thanks.
Yes. Anybody like to respond to that? Actually, I will take up a point myself, if you don't mind. And I think Nora mentioned the aspect of algorithms, and this comes to the big issue we're facing today of the development of artificial intelligence. We've already had, it's not exactly artificial intelligence, but we've already had a big experience in Australia of government imposing debts on people, actually contrary to law, but which it became known under the name of robo-debt. I just wonder, Tony, if you got any comment on the challenges of artificial intelligence in relation to Catholic social teaching.
It's a very good question. And I think that, you know, the pontifical academies of sciences and social sciences are debating this issue right now. It's a very new issue. I think, you know, Pope Francis in Laudato Si does talk about the fact that technology should not be used to to make people unemployed, that it's bad business for society when machines take people's jobs. And, you know, with AI, that's becoming an increasingly live problem. And we could end up in a world where the tech billionaires own everything and the rest of the people have very little, low wages, very few jobs, very limited prospects. So this is kind of a dystopian future, but it's one possible future with the future of AI, I'm afraid. So it's going to depend on public policy to make sure we avoid that dystopian future.
So distributive justice becoming a even bigger challenge, perhaps. Yep. Okay. Anybody else got a question that they'd like or a comment that they'd like to make at this point? We've been going for
can I just ask one question further? Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on that issue of right-wing extremism, which I think is a really worrying phenomenon in society, particularly in the last decade, and seems to come from a kind of extreme libertarian view combined with some extraordinary levels of misinformation. To be honest, it seems to come out of America, but it does infiltrate everywhere. Do you have any comments on that and how best to approach people caught up in those views? I mean, it's almost a visceral reaction people have. And it's very hard to have discussions based along facts with some people caught up in that, in those mindsets. I don't know if you can comment on that really, but I guess that issue did come up earlier and I was keen to explore it a bit further. Thank you.
I would just say that, from the perspective of Catholic social teaching, that there is no compatibility between Catholicism and this kind of radical libertarianism. And it fundamentally misinterprets the nature of the human person. And I think that's the best argument that I would use when dealing with that kind of argument. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the sovereign citizen movements that you see everywhere that want to extract people from any form of, as a right from any form of cohesion in society.
Yeah.
It does seem to grab certain people. I think often people whose circumstances aren't great and who get exploited as well. But yeah, I think thank you for that comment.
Right. I've been alerted that Mauro has a question, Mauro, and also Barbara is in the list. So Mauro, would you like to make your comment or question?
Just a couple of quick comments. I think one of the great difficulties in contesting neoliberalism or economic liberalism is that its self-understanding is not that of being a worldview or a philosophy or whatever. So that when you're engaging with coherent neoliberals, they present themselves as representing reality or nature or common sense. So it's not as though, if you like, self-conscious social democrats are arguing against self-aware and self-conscious neoliberals. It's much less fair than that, if I can put it that way. You're often with coherent and self-aware economic liberals. They are people who really believe that the way in which they understand the economy, neoclassical economics, represents reality. And so in a sense, they kind of immunize themselves against the kind of arguments that one might want to provide on Catholic social teaching grounds. The other comment I'd like to make is on the practicalities of engaging in public policy debate, where at least in Australian culture anyway, it's very difficult to have these sort of conversations in any explicit or public kind of way. It's much easier to have conversations about the calibrate what we would call, or say, calibrations of pension. Should it be $25 a week, $35 a week, and that kind of thing. And that's the technocracy bit, if you like. So there's a kind of a expulsion of any kind of ethical conversation, much less Catholic social thought, from not only the public sphere, as in the mass media, as but also in serious policy networks. There is no way that we could talk this way in any self-respecting policy committee or policy network in a public setting. It would have to be done in different ways. I know I'm raising a variety of issues at the same time. One is sort of theoretical, and the other one is the practical of how to engage in various aspects of public life in this. But I think there's a lot there. Yes.
Would you like to respond to that, Tony?
Just that I appreciate the comment. Yeah.
Yep. Great. Now, Barbara had a question or a comment also, Barbara Cooper, and I think Ian Barnes. So Barbara, are you there? Feel free to speak up. Or if Barbara's not ready, I think Ian, would you like to make your comment or ask your question?
Barbara has a problem with their microphone. And Ian, do you want to turn your microphone on and make your comment now? We'll try and come back to Barbara Cooper's microphone. Something's happening there. Thank you, Ian.
Oh, thanks. Tony, thank you for your talk, and also thank you for your wonderful book. It's great. As you know, there's a lot of discussion about liberalism, both at international level and domestic level. The liberal international order is seen to be under threat from a new multipolar world. And also within domestic context, liberalism as a kind of overarching philosophical framework is being challenged, not least by Catholics. So Patrick Deneen's book, The Failure of Liberalism, but also this Francis Fukuyama talking about liberalism and its discontents. How do you, in your position, engage with that discussion. Are you a defender of liberalism, or I mean, it's not just neoliberalism, but a much broader kind of whole tradition of liberal thinking about the state and society and the person?
Yeah, the way I would answer that is I think that, in the 19th century, the church was a big opponent of that kind of liberalism. But in a sense, it made its peace with the Second Vatican Council, and it affirmed human rights and democracy through the influence of people like Jacques Maritain, who were able to basically say that, out of the Christian or the natural law tradition, we can actually defend human rights based on human dignity, like from Parliamentaris, and also democracy. So I would not agree with the diagnosis of people like Patrick Deneen. And I do think that so liberalism definitely has advantages that need to be maintained. Where I would agree would be that the economic liberalism, what we call neoliberalism, the church has been very consistent in condemning that from the 19th century all the way through to today, and that never changed. Even though you do have some Catholic neoliberals, people like Michael Novak and George Weigel, but honestly, they are not in line with Catholic social teaching, I'm afraid. I mean, you just have to read the documents to figure that out.
That was a very clear response. I'm not sure if Barbara's go on. Somebody else was about to say something.
Oh, it's me again. Can I follow up with that? I mean, there is also the emergence of a more kind of right-wing Catholic integralism, which is associated with the Journal of First Things. I mean, that's in a sense they're supportive of a kind of right-wing authoritarianism in America. How do you engage with those people?
Don't know, actually. I mean, integralism is dangerous. It violates the Second Vatican Council. It violates the idea of religious liberty. It violates ecumenism. So I don't know. I think those people are a very weird fringe, to be honest. And they're certainly not in alignment with modern Catholic teaching.
That's good.
And Ian, I can assure you they are present on Australian social media Catholic forums, which is equally distressing because, they're very hard to have a discussion or an argument. And it's probably one of the frustrating elements, Tony, within the church and the awareness of, I love the way you presented those principles, and those quotes are so valuable. I presume you made reference to the fact that the slides will be shared. Is that going to be correct, Stefan? This recording will be made and shared amongst the participants and in public, will it?
That's our plan. I have to check with Tony if that's all right with him, but that's our hope. Yep.
Fringe are alive and well in the Catholic Church in the form of many bishops.
Yeah. Can I just say in the chat, there's a comment saying that Barbara's having a problem with her sound. Her question was whether economic thinkers like Amartya Sen or Joseph Stiglitz had traction in policy making circles in any country. So that's from Russell and Barbara.
I think that, again, with Joe Stiglitz, you get kind of an alignment and kind of a new approach to social democracy. That will be very much there. And then Amartya Sen, the new approach to well-being, which goes beyond GDP. You kind of see the influence of Amartya Sen in that too. So I do think that people like that are having a growing influence, which is all to the good. Sen and Stiglitz are both excellent top-class economists, and we want to hear more from them.
I noticed that Mark Ager, you've got your microphone on. Are you wanting to say something or ask a question?
I was, Stefan. I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and she was telling me how she's got 7 houses that she rents out. And I asked her why this was important to her, because obviously she was proud of this fact. And I said, you know, do you think you might be contributing to the fact that a lot of people are having difficulty getting houses in Australia because, you know, rent's going through the roof and this kind of stuff? And she's a very good and intelligent person, but she just looked at me as if I was a complete moron for asking that question. And you know, when we look at these values that Tony's been talking about, it's good for us as Christians to actually, you know, declare these values, but how do we actually get it across, you know, to some people? Because, you know, we've all got our values so deep inside of us. And it reminded me of Joseph Cardijn and his mother, how his mother used to give him, you know, money and give him the option of giving it to the poor or keeping it to himself. And you know, as older people, you know, I think we've got a real responsibility to lead here and share this wisdom, you know, with our grandchildren and our children, and challenge, you know, this kind of stuff. It's a real difficult thing. You know, I come across really good and deep intelligent people who've been to university, but their values in terms of competitiveness and status, in terms of wealth, are just really annoyingly shallow.
Yes, well, that's a real challenge you've raised for us there, Mark. It might take us beyond this little webinar here today. Do you want to make a comment about that, Tony?
I would just say that if you go back to the Old Testament prophets, or Aristotle, or Thomas Aquinas, or the church fathers, or Jesus, they all had very harsh language to describe what happens to you when you end up worshiping wealth over, when you put the value of mammon over truly virtuous behavior. Quite consistent actually in their diagnosis. And I try and talk about that in the book quite a bit. Yeah.
Maura, sorry, I'm cutting off anybody. I think Maura was going to follow up with another comment or question.
Yes, I was going to remind us that a lot of the official documents are crystallizations of stuff that's been happening, bubbling away below them, if you like, what authors like Boswell have called social Catholicism, that they pick up the insights and the activities and the praxis of Catholics involved in politics and society and so on. So for me, one of the sources of hope is, say, if you like, not so much the documents as important as they are, but the way in which they are being applied or used in policy. So I'm thinking of practical things like the Catholic Social Welfare Commission or the Industrial Relations Commission and so on. These are bodies that are constantly engaging with the state on the basis of Catholic social thought and trying to articulate it and re-articulate it in ways that make sense in the more, if you like, concrete or, you know, lower level environments that we're talking about. So for me, not only one of the areas of interest, but also one of the areas of hope is the work that's being done at this lower level by Catholic organizations who are, you know, attending to the sorts of things that Tony, that you've been talking about. I think there's a richness there that we can miss if we just stay at this macro, you know, this very high philosophical level. Yeah.
Right. Good point.
All right. Well, look, we've been going for well over an hour now. I'll just ask if anybody's got any final question or comment that they think hasn't been made before. Nora, yes, Nora's got her hand up. Go.
Yes, I think one of the insights which Karl Marx gave us was in the basic contradiction between use value and market value. And the use value comes down to human values and the values in the home and reciprocal values of exchange and so on, highlighted anyway. So, and the market values are always in contradiction to those other values. And I think it's important wherever we're engaged, especially with this really nasty, how can I say, these nasty situations which we're trying to grapple with within larger activity systems, that we help the different stakeholders or the agents involved to pinpoint, to see what are those contradictions, what is the actual contradiction between the use value and the market value in this specific situation. And then how does that relate to faith, using the See, Judge, Act method in order to drive transformative action? Remembering that we're coming from the Catholic social action movements. And inevitably, I mean, we were inspired through Karl Marx and not just Karl Marx, but a whole philosophical framework of a particular era going back to Spinoza and looking at how material reality is infused with the incarnate presence of Christ. And so what we need to really think about is how within my specific situation, for example, in my doctoral research, I looked at the contradiction between home language and English as a globalized market value language, and how that impacts on the education of the young child. That's just a small example, but how it can lead to transformative action from the bottom up and also within larger structures. So it's what is called fourth generation activity theory in Finland, and I'm just throwing it out there because we're dealing with more and more complex issues with larger and larger activity systems interacting with one another, both at local level in order to transform situations through and up all the time, with a bottom-up view of society, taking that option for the poor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nora. Yes, the challenge to action. So, I don't know, Tony, would you like to make any final remarks?
Just to thank everybody for coming out and listening to my talk. I very much appreciate it, and I wish everybody well. Yeah.
Yes, thanks very much. I'd like to thank you too, Tony, for joining us from, I think, Washington, D.C. And I think Tony Robertson has put in the chat your Twitter handle. So I follow Tony on Twitter, and it's a really engaging place to follow up on these discussions that we've kind of launched today. So I do recommend that to you as well as reading his book. And on behalf of everybody, I would like to thank you, Tony, and hope we can all meet again in one forum or another. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Excellent.